Welcome to Soul Forum. We are glad you are here. Whether you're joining us in person on a Sunday morning for our kind of collaborative conversation, or whether you're using this YouTube channel as a way to kind of tap into the community to see how we might partner together, collaborate together to explore the soul's journey. The theme for Soul Forum that we came up with long ago was Soul Forum, a journey across the landscape of the collective soul. And I've been really thinking about that a lot lately since our last gathering, and that, I think what we're up to together, and you're a part of this, is an experiment in many ways of exploring what it feels like when we tether our journeys together, and we're not trying to advocate for one particular way of being spiritual, but rather we're sharing the process we go through, the insights we have, the wisdom we stumble into along the way. And all that's just a part of this collaborative process that allows us each to shape and mature our own spiritual journey. One of the things that I noticed last week after the conversation, I wanted to share a story with you, is that I think there's moments, we talk about our lives evolving kind of like a spiral. And there's moments when we find along the way that there are tethers to these earlier moments in our experience of life that we didn't understand what that might have meant at the time. But then later on, as we continue to move through our process or hear wisdom from other people, we realize, oh my goodness, the seeds of that idea or that longing were planted years ago, and I didn't even notice. I mean, obviously they were below the surface, maturing. Let me share you a story. This is the story of it's the story of shame that I experienced returning to the convent. All right. So I was on this was years and years ago, and I was very much into silent meditation. I really felt like that was the pathway. Right? I had my own spiritual construct that felt fine to me, but I felt like there was more, right, that I needed to dive into, and silent meditation seemed like a pathway into that. So I had practiced silent meditation, and it took years to figure out sort of how to dive into the experience of silent meditation. So I felt like I was ready to take it even deeper, and so I signed up for a 5-day silent retreat at the Mercy Center in Burlingame. It's a monastery, and there's modern, really modern nuns there, and the whole thing. It's a beautiful space. It's very contemplative, gated community that just allows you to disappear from the Bay Area for but a moment and live into this sort of soul-filled landscape. No, I'm very excited about it. So I start the conference. Day 1, day 2, and this is all absolute long days of silence. They don't want you to bring a journal. They don't want you to bring a book. You go to meals, and meals are shared in absolute silence. There's nobody talking, and you quietly engage the meal that you have. Long sits where you just you're contemplative. You sit quietly. You're diving down into your inner self. There's walks. Everything's silent. There's no talking. Well, about day 3, I realized that I'm not positive that this path is nourishing my soul. In fact, I was just starting to go nuts. And I was like, I don't know what I'm getting by taking this journey. There were some beautiful insights along the way, but I could tell that my whole being was starting to push back on this experience. And maybe it was just I needed to practice more. I don't know what it was. So that night, after the session was over, the evening session after dinner, I snuck out of the convent, and I drove downtown Burlingame, and I found a bar, and I just went in and just had a couple of cocktails and sat in the bar, and there, all of a sudden, it was like someone had lifted a veil, right? For the first time in a bar, and I'm by myself, right? And I've been in silence for days. I begin to hear like every conversation in that bar. I hear a couple working through a relationship problem. I hear somebody else talking about the dynamics at work. I hear somebody talking about baseball, someone about politics, on and on and on. All of these conversations, these words, this poetry, this collective ruckus engagement with each other, just exploding in my brain. And it was as if I was just ecstatic with the experience. And I felt like this language of regular people, this banter of bounty and beauty that I was experiencing in the bar as I had my cocktail, that's where the magic happens, right? Why am I not listening to the stories that we're all trying to construct to find meaning in our lives or share that meaning with other people? And it just opened up something inside of me, right? I finish up down at the bar, and let me pause there, right? It opened up something inside me that I didn't recognize until we've been having these soul forum conversations. And then I realized in these conversations that that's kind of what I was longing for in that bar experience, right? This like poetry slam moment that holds me in collective wisdom and frees me to maybe explore my own poetic expression of soul, embraces that, but also immerses it in sort of this wider body. And that just felt to me like the right thing, right? The right thing. So I go back, now it's really late. It's past curfew at the monastery, which I don't know why I didn't register that. So I go back and the gate to the monastery is locked. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get back in. And I'm, I've had a couple cocktails. Obviously, I probably have alcohol on my breath. I'm trying to get back into a monastery quietly, secretly, and I can't get in. So I have to ring the doorbell. And I ring the doorbell, and St. Peter shows up at the gate. Turns out St. Peter is a security guard and asks me a bunch of questions. I explain what I'm coming back to the silent retreat. And he slowly opens the door and, lets me in. But I knew as I could feel his eyes on me walking back up to the space where the dormitories were, he was watching me very closely. And I had this real weight of shame as I journeyed back into the convent. Finished off with a couple more days of silence. And it was a powerful experience, but I realized that maybe that experience needs to go hand in hand with this more immersive style of wisdom seeking that I think we're sharing in Soul Forum. And I bring that up because I want you to imagine what it's like to entrust yourself maybe to a community in which you feel safe and confident and tenderly held to the point where you can find your own particular expression or language, like finding some sort of harmonic way in which your words play with the words and the languages and the feelings and the experiences of others, like finding your harmony inside of this harmonic whole. And maybe that's what this experiment is all about, right? We're not trying to dictate a path. We're not trying to resurrect a path from the past. We're trying to be fully present in the moment in order to see how sacred or soul or spirit moves in our time and in our lives. It reminds me of a poem I just read the other day, and I'm going to share two poems with you. This is a piece by Norbise Philip. She's a Canadian poet, but she brings just a wealth of experience to her poetry. And this one I love. It's from her new book called Zong. And the name of this poem is Atonement. But I am hunting for something, anything, to give me some bearing, since I am, metaphorically speaking, at sea, having cut myself off from the comfort and predictability of my own language, my own meaning. But I am hunting for something, anything to give me some bearing, since I am metaphorically speaking at sea, having cut myself off from the comfort and predictability of my own language, my own meaning. I love that piece because it touches at the sort of the risk and vulnerability that it takes to do what you and I are doing together. Right? For us to pause long enough in each other's company to find the kind of words that takes us on this journey across the landscape of some kind of collective soul or experience of soul. And collective soul doesn't mean that there's an exterior collective soul in which we are looking for, but it's a collective soul in that as we share our stories together, we are immersed in that collective, right? That experience. And in some ways, we maybe never arrive at place, but we're always at place. And maybe that's the magic of it. So I wonder, as we continue this journey together at Soul Forum, and I want to talk about this both on Sunday morning if you gather us live, so pay attention to this, or Tuesday at 5 if you join us for the Zoom call. You know, what are the tools or the characteristics of such a journey? And I just want to highlight a couple. One, I think you have to bring sort of your full imagination to the process. And in some ways, try to orient into the journey, not through proclamation or conclusion, but maybe by immersing yourself more fully in metaphor. And that's why we talked the last 2 weeks about kind of crafting a piece of poetry or creating your own parable, because it's the metaphoric world that has this power to maybe open up new frontier. One of the authors that I love, who is also in the Christian tradition, Patterson is his name, Stephen Patterson. He writes about kind of the work that we've done on parables, and he uses this notion to help us understand what the metaphor is really like. Metaphor, he says, has the ability to create something new, using language to call into being an imaginative reality, heretofore not experienced and still unknown. The language gives shape to a person's then perception of the world, especially through the stories that we begin to tell each other. These parables, or this metaphor world in which we construct, are the stories that shatter the deep structure of our accepted world and thereby render clear and evident to us the relativity of the story itself, or how the story, allows us to live into the moment that we share. It removes our defenses and it makes us vulnerable to the experience of our emerging soul. Isn't that great? I mean, at this point, I would rewind that and listen to it again. So one aspect, I think, of our time together that I think we need to hold on to robustly is this idea of creativity and metaphor and feeling comfortable with language that we're exploring together. The other one is that we need to be able to listen super deeply and attentively to the stories of others, just to be present for them without judgment, to allow them to sink into our own skin and maybe have some kind of effect, to provide feedback that allows the other person to hear their story repeated back. That really feels like a part of the journey. We've been doing a little bit of that. I really think that's a piece of the puzzle, is this, the language of listening. What is that? How does that work? And then the last two, one is to, I think, kind of trust yourself to this moment that we share. I every time I either sit down and talk to you or come to Soul Forum or engage in this process, I don't know what's going to happen, really. And I trust myself to the process that we share collaboratively. And having that level of trust allows me to to be present in a different way. I'm not coming in with suspicion. I'm not coming in with a whole ton of preconceived notions about what I want to accomplish that day, although I do have an agenda that I rarely manage to get to the end of. So I'm coming to be present, and I hope you're doing the same. Then the dynamism, and this is what I want to close on with a piece of poetry by Amanda Gorman that I'm going to share with you via email. This sort of knowing capacity to be able to know that I am going to be, along with you, disassembling and assembling, disengaging and returning, moving inward, moving outward, spiraling, pushing up and out, kind of like a growing thing, that I am coming to grow alongside of you. To be in a growth moment alongside of you is what I think the Soulform journey is all about. Whether you're listening to the podcast and hearing the stories of others, sharing your own story, finding language for your story, sitting in silence and waiting for it to arrive. Waiting is a big part of this. Slowing down, whatever it happens to be, that I'm coming to become. That makes sense? I'm coming to become, not to arrive. And I know that becoming is this constant thing in my life. Let me close by using a piece of poetry from Amanda Gorman and just reflecting on it for a moment with you together, and then possibly spending some time when we gather together on Sunday or Tuesday, kind of talking about how this lands with you. This is a piece called Closure from her book, Call Us What We Carry, which is a wonderful one. Closure. To begin again isn't to go backwards, but to decide to go. Our story is not a circle carved, but a spiral shed, shaped, spinning, shifting inward and outward ad infinitum, like a lung on the bank of speech. Breathe with us. We disembark both beside and beyond. Who we were, who we are, it is a return and a departure. We spiral on, pushing up and out like a growing thing, making its form out of earth. In a poem, there is no end, just a place where the page glows wide and waiting, like a lifted hand, poised and paused. Isn't that a beautiful piece? Let me read it again and just kind of sink into it one more time, especially if you're just listening today on YouTube. To begin again isn't to go backwards, but to decide to go. Our story is not a circle carved, but a spiral shed, shaped, spinning, shifting inward and outward ad infinitum, like a lung on the bank of speech. Breathe with us. We disembark both beside and beyond, who we are, who we were. It's a return and a departure. We spiral on, pushing up and out like a growing thing, making its form out of earth. In a poem, there is no end, just a place where the page glows wide and waiting, like a lifted hand, poised and paused. Isn't that beautiful? My hope is that the experience of Soulform for you is a little bit like that piece of poetry, right? It is a place where you're willing to arrive, be present, risk stumbling into language or silence or even body language that allows for you to be present fully and share your sense of soul with others. To me, that sounds and feels like the right way forward for communities in our time and in our place when everything is in transition. Everything feels like it's moving super fast. And how do you, like COVID invited us, right? How do you pull back just enough to attend to the experience of it and to be present for it in a different kind of way and not just be on autopilot through the whole thing? That to me feels a little bit like that initial poem, like we're all on the deep sea journeying together, right? So I'm glad that you're, at least you've chosen at this point to be a part of the journey. Let me close by reading the final few words of that poem by Amanda Gorman this morning, or today, whenever you're kind of experiencing this, and see how it lands with you. And whether confident enough that you dare to share your own kind of emerging story of soul with others is really like the only stable ground on which we can travel. She ends her poem this way. So remember that piece of poetry, and she says, "Here is our bond, unbordered by bone. Perhaps love is how it feels to breathe the same air. All we have is time, is now. Time takes us on. How we are moved says everything about what we are to each other, and what we are to each other, if not everything." Let me read that one more time, especially since I messed up the last line. "Here is our bond, unbordered by bone. Perhaps love is how it feels to breathe the same air. All we have is time, is now. Time takes us on. How we are moved says everything about what we are to each other. And what are we to each other, if not everything?" Wise words, I think, from Amanda Gorman. Take those with you into the day ahead and let them maybe percolate for you as we continue this conversation in Soul Forum. And thanks for being a part of it. And of course, thanks to all of you who have been supporting this journey, whether it be with your time, your energy, your spirit, your money, your commitments, your willingness to share it with other people. It's all awesome stuff. Thanks for being in the deep water with us. See you next week.